Imagine a cosmic horror, unlike anything you've ever seen before, descending upon Earth. The human race fights back with everything they've got, and, against all odds, they kill a god. The other gods in a realm beyond our understanding speak of the unthinkable event. Today, on ReddFic, we'll take you on a journey through some best Reddit stories that will make your heart race and your mind question everything you know about reality. Welcome to ReddFic, where Reddit stories come to life. Our first story. They have died. Meddled with a black hole again? Tried to embrace an organic species. And when did they die? The species killed they. You are mistaken, The waves have been clear enough. They have died at the hands of a small organic species. That is impossible. How could? I keep telling you that you underestimate them. How nice of you to join us. These little creatures have more potential than you realize, something they just found out. Your affection towards bacteria is touching truly. The bacteria that just killed one of us, we cannot let this stand. We must embrace them in their stead and wait until they return. No, I have plans for them. More useful to me alive. You will not touch them. And if we or it refuse, then I'll tell them how to kill you too. Now listen, our second story. Death is a strange thing. To most of the universe, it might be considered a constant. It is something unavoidable, and in a twisted way brings meaning to life. To those of the forgotten church, death was more of a concept. It was an interesting idea that offered respite from the toiled labor of unceasing existence. So when it finally came, none knew exactly what to make of it. Despite that, this event must be met with an answer, a resolute statement. Lesser entities have long feared us. What are we to do when that fear erodes? When it is replaced by curiosity? The voice of silence yet found spoke, ethereal and jagged. And what answer would you have of us? Replied solace once given. That we go forward and destroy them? That we act as we did in the time before light? That we rush blindly towards all perceived as alien and smother it out of existence? I need not remind you how long we suffered in the blackness before, lost without time. A few of the other high church twisted uncomfortably in the nebulous cloud. Well, at least it seemed that way. In truth, meeting in this dark purple and black birthplace of stars was more out of ceremony and necessity. Since the Reformation, each had been linked. All creatures present before the light birth shared a shard of the blackness before deep within them. Through that piece of jagged emptiness, they were bound. It was this same piece of the long-forgotten blackness that roared in rage, agony, then complete silence when Sans Not Disturbed had ventured forward into the cosmos and found that strange blue planet. You make it sound as if these events are comparable, spoke Silence Yet Found, as if the destruction of one of our own kin by a sentient being sits on the same scale of relevance as wound inflicted by distant supernova. Is it not? Wondered Light Soon Forgotten. Is this not also a natural working of the universe? The creation of these creatures, then their subsequent rise to sentience? A few echoes rang out through the gaseous fog of the nebula as entities spoke softly to themselves or one another. None had forgotten the lessons imparted unto them when escaping the blackness before. That you must let things, even alien, grow and flourish. You have yet to understand what light they may come to bring. Perhaps we observe then. Light Soon Forgotten had yet to speak at any of the rarely hosted meetings of the church. He was, after all, so young as to barely recall the darkness before. It was no secret that the opinions of those long lived in light held little sway in the minds of those long steeped in the blackness. They are still incapable of travel. Why else would they have not expanded their domain? In the opinion of this member of the congregation, we are provided a unique opportunity. We might learn from a safe distance, disturbing not them or ourselves in the effort. A greater rumbling stirred amongst the participants. True, the threat of annihilation was a new one. Yet that in and of itself was so interesting. After countless millennia, there were finally new thoughts. New fears. Despite the cold package in which it came, The warmth and brilliance of new ideas was intoxicating. Ideas spoken from a tongue which has only known the warmth of stars birthed. Spat silence yet found. A few of his monstrous tentacles cut through the purple fog, leaving large swaths of agitated vapor in their wake. You would let them fester. How long then, do you think? Until they do escape the confines of their worldly prison? Would you still observe when they inhabit a whole system? Or is it more in your interest to let them desecrate the whole of a galaxy before you feel we need intervene? Light, soon forgotten, had known his speaking might be out of turn. Even still, the direct irritation of one of the Ancient was distinctly disturbing. Apologies, Ancient One, Light, soon forgotten, spoke, drawing his appendages inward to make himself smaller and servient, but enough. Solace once given boomed. Do not backpedal, young one. Even if your skin is more accustomed to light than dark, your words hold wisdom. Solace once given turned his hulking frame slowly in the cold mist toward silence yet found. Their 1,000 eyes met each other in a cold stare. Or would you attempt to speak to me in that manner as well? The silence which overtook the nebula for a few moments was all the reply needed. We go with numbers. All in attendance of this meeting will embark to this strange oddity, and we shall observe. Unless, of course, they deem the trip too dangerous. As Solace once given spoke the final words, he glared his countless orange eyes towards silence, yet found who dismissively flipped a handful of tentacles. Though he would never admit it, even he was intrigued by thought of new knowledge. New creations after so very, very long. The creatures began to depart, hulking bodies leaving streaks of purple fog behind them in the blackness of void. So many moved that where their convoy went, the stars were blotted out, only momentarily showing pricks of light between countless masses of gangly and twisted tentacles. Now listen, our third story. Amithta had 10,000 eyes, and every last one of them was weeping. Rasha Sundel slammed a tankard of fermented souls into its 3-lobed maw, drunkenly cursing. That which Seeks offered Amithta, a sheet-shaped cloud of interstellar dust. Amithta noisily blew its nose upon its projection in exospace, thanking that which Seeks as an afterthought. It was a funeral for a god, and everyone had arrived. I'd like to thank you all for coming, Rasha Sundel slurred out. The Devourer was many things to us. A friend, a lover, a nightmare made flesh. The assembled deities rumbled in approval. When we first got word that the Devourer's soul planet had developed life, I'd like to think that nobody was happier about it than the Devourer itself. May its soul blaze on. Here, here, Amithta rumbled. But when that life metastasized, when it warped the planet so much that old Devi started to sicken and die, did they listen when we told them to stop? No! They just clutched their ears and screamed as their internal organs liquefied from the deific pressure of our voice. And when we tried to force them into behaving, here, Rasha Sundel took another swig from its tankard before sundering it from reality with a thought. The spiteful fuckers didn't even try to fight us. They knew they couldn't touch us. No, they turned their weapons on their own fucking planet, ruined it beyond repair, and took Devi with them. Amithta wouldn't stop sobbing. That which Seeks handed it another nebula. They paid the price, of course. Rasha Sundel peered into soul space, where the still cooling remnants of a shattered planet orbited around a flickering star. No clue where they evacuated to, but we'll find them. We'll find them, and make them pay for what they did to old Devi. The assembled deities roared in agreement. And then Rash Sundel froze mid-sentence, doubling over as if struck by a cosmic baseball bat. What? The eldritch entity from beyond humanity's universe opened and closed its mouth in incomprehension. How can... Who dares? That which Seeks vomited, its body quavering and unraveling. And Amithta shrieked as its 1,000 eyes began to blacken and close. In a flash of understanding, Rash Sundel peered into soul space, at the distant star cluster where its soul planet laid. Where its soul planet had lain. Where there was now just an expanding cloud of gas and dust. No, Rash Sundel whispered, disbelieving. You abominations, you monsters, was one of us not enough? Must you take everything from us? As if in spiteful response, The star itself that Rash Sundel's soul planet had once orbited dimmed, once. Then it erupted in a supernova an eon before its time, and Rash Sundel screamed in agony as its soul planet was rendered nothing more than subatomic particles. But how? How did they find? That which seeks struggled to rise, to peer into soul space once more. It should have been impossible. A needle in a haystack. There should have been no way for the humans to find their soul planets, unless, as that which seeks unraveled, its mind finally sighted upon the answer. There was no need for the humans to know which planet served as the eldritch deity's soul. Not with what they'd done. One by one, across the cosmos, stars flared bright before winking out forever. And one by one, the gods they'd sustained did too. Now listen, our fourth story. Hey Frank. Hey George. Happy Monday, eh? No man. Did you hear about Andrew? Oh God, what now? Did he get drunk and show his dick to the secretary again? That guy is a liability. No, that's Alan. He got fired last week. Andrew is the guy who negotiated our health benefits. Oh yeah, that guy's great. What happened? Wait, did you say Alan got fired? Is his desk free? No, forget about Alan, we're talking Andrew. He's fucking dead, man. No shit? What happened? Hay went to visit some planet full of tiny monkeys, said he was going to give them some cancer cures and other health stuff. Classic Andrew. Anyway, the monkeys fucking killed him. What? No way, how do tiny monkeys kill somebody? That sounds made up. The monkeys had explosives. Apparently they blew a hole in his chest or something, I don't know. A hole in his chest. That's what Bill in it told me, I don't know. It's not like I was there. Man, that's fucked. Didn't he have a wife? Yeah, and she's pregnant. Damn. Our health benefits are probably going to suck next year. God damn, Frank. What? And seriously, is Alan's desk free because I could fuck with that window seat? Now listen, our fifth story. Just a short story on the coffee break I had. Drugnell, I don't have for your jokes today, Imlogda said. I have several realms to visit today, so much work. Imlogda sighed. I am not joking, Ogandis is dead, Umladurnel said with his thunderous voice. We can't even die, Imlogda said, frustration building in his voice. Timon, be more creative if you are going to annoy me. Imlogda, brother, it is true, Umladurnel said, trying to sound as sincere as he could. Stop and feel it. Try to find the connection. Imlogda reluctantly stopped everything that he was doing and tapped into the connection they all shared. It was true, and there was a hole, part of them missing. Ogandis was not there. It felt wrong, and it felt painful. It was strange. No cosmic entity has ever died. What? Imlogda stuttered. What happened? His fascination with humans was the end of him, Umladurnel said. He couldn't leave Earth alone. He was drawn to it, to them. Humans, and that prophecy drove him crazy. But how did they kill him? Imlogda asked. How is it even possible? They have insanely powerful weapons from nuclear bombs to railguns, and they threw everything at him. One nuclear bomb would not do any damage, but they threw hundreds of them, and Ogandis was cocky. He felt invincible, and now he is no more. Umladurnel's thunder in his voice was barely noticeable. Maybe that prophecy is not complete nonsense. Maybe that small planet is our doom, Imlogda said. Cancel everything I have today and tell the rest of our brothers I went to pay that little planet a visit, and they will see what real wrath looks like now. Now listen, our sixth story. Mr. A, did you hear? Some men killed God. I hadn't heard that, Mrs. B, thank you, said Mr. A, and he loaded his pipe, puffed absently, watched the blue-gray smoke as it curled up into the eaves. It's true, Mrs. B went on, voice warbling, her eyes dark and acquisitive, red-rimmed like a magpie's. They say that God went back to Earth. You know the one, meaning to apologize. He'd forgotten something, see, and it caused quite some trouble. Only, and this is the really unbelievable part, they didn't recognize him. Can imagine that? God? She gestured vaguely, and Mr. A did. He wished that she would leave him to his pipe and the birds. The real ones who were singing very prettily right now, down the gently sloping field of green, green grass, and beyond that, in the wheat that grew up wild on the edges of his property, before the tree line. But of course she didn't. Mrs. B went on warbling for quite some time, until his pipe was empty, and that pleasant buzz had worn right off, and all he could think about was that first thing she'd said, "Some men killed God." Atomics most likely, and that was his fault. He'd invented them on account of the A in his name, just like he'd invented apples, aardvarks, and the alphabet. A mistake, though not one that he could have controlled. Some things simply were. And now God simply wasn't. Why, it took the wind right out of your sail. News like that, other people were sure to overreact. But oh, where has the time gone? Mrs. B was saying, "I have a pie in the oven. Apple, if you must know." And Mr. B's hearing isn't what it was, sometimes misses the timer. "I'm afraid I really must be going." "Yes, yes, away you go," said Mr. A. He stood to show her out, held her arm politely, kissed her sagging cheek, watched for a moment as she trundled away towards the trees, knock-kneed and ungainly, half swaddled in a threadbare shawl. A woman old as time itself. Almost as old in fact as him. He spat into the flower beds and reloaded his pipe. So, he thought, God was dead. And he watched as the wind ruffled trees in a place that looked, for no particularly good reason, like a town in early 20th century Ohio. The neighbors would be out in force by now. Mr. C, D, E, and F. The wives, as inseparable as their husbands, organizing a commemoration of some sort. No doubt why Mrs. B was baking. By the evening, Mr. C would come around to ask him to chair the meeting. Formulate a response to the God dilemma. And how was he supposed to do that really? Why, they might even ask him to create another Mr. G. They were obsessed with things like that. Appearances. As if they were all slats in the same white picket fence. Mr. A blew a smoke ring. Contemplated it. Blew another, more complex, like he had all that time ago. And then another, until he blew cathedrals, airplanes, mountains. He blew smoke rings until the sky began to darken, and he saw Mr. C there coming towards him across the field. Mr. C was tall and thin, and wore a little woolen flat cap and a corduroy suit, patched at the knees and elbows. After dinner he smoked fine cigars or played cribbage with the ladies, and on occasion he had been known to brew a very pleasant sort of brandy that had been introduced on Earth as, what was it now? Ah yes, cognac. In a few moments Mr. C would clumping up onto the porch and ask him to address the God dilemma, and quite simply Mr. A was too tired for all that. Mr. A blew away his smoke cathedrals and decided that he didn't want to hear God's name for a while. 1,000 years perhaps, or more. And if he ever made another, filled out the neighborhood, perhaps he'd skip that letter. Go on to make his eyes and GS. Evidently there was something wrong with GG promoted delusions. Mr. A didn't quite understand that, and thought he never would. There was something terribly illogical about the impulse to godhood. Why the man couldn't be content here, among pristine fields and gently rolling hills, with apple pies and airplanes and aardvarks, he just couldn't fathom. Mr. C clumped up onto the porch and sat beside him. He lit his cigar and began to smoke, which was a bad sign because it was still too early for him to have eaten dinner. They blew smoke rings towards the setting, and the rings' edges blurred away in questions, and though neither of them were sad precisely, there was nonetheless something bittersweet between them. Left by Mrs. B? Perhaps. Regardless, they just sat silent for a while, until Mrs. A called her husband to dinner. Well, Mr. C, Mr. A said, it's been fine. Hey now, just a moment, Mr. C said. After dinner, how about? I think now, Mr. A, Mr. C insisted. Just a minute, love, Mr. A called out. His wife's face appeared in the window, still striking after all these years, and then disappeared. This God business is very bad, said Mr. C. Mr. D should never have invented death, said Mr. A. Or delusion. Mr. A nodded sadly. Or delusion. But now we are left with a problem, said Mr. C. Are we? Of course. There are 8 billion, shall we call them people? 8 billion people out there, spinning on some damn misshapen bit of rock, and now they've killed their creator. And I think we owe them something, said Mr. C. Another Mr. G. Why, yes. You will, of course, explain, Mr. A said flatly. And Mr. C puffed a while the sun set and a fine dinner grew quite cold. It goes like this, he said at last. For all these years God, Mr. G, had this project, and at first the project didn't work. He made it and remade it, over and over and over, kind of like you've built this house, with your own lips and hands, blown out of so much smoke, until it— Yes, Mr. A said, they have atomics. And whose fault is that? I'm not on trial here. Mr. C snorted, tendrils of smoke issuing from his nose. But don't you see, he said, it was working. They were becoming, if not real people, then a kind of echo, sometimes pleasant, but now, in a fit of terror, they've killed off their own morality. I wasn't aware that I'd created a Mr. M, Mr. A said. Oh, come off it, Mr. C said. You know what I mean? No, I don't, Mr. A said. Will those Earthmen go a little while and see what they do? If they're people truly, they won't need a god for their morality. I'd like to think it's set in a bit deeper than all that. A thoughtful expression passed across Mr. C's face then. You think a god isn't necessary for morality? Of course, Mr. A said. I'm perfectly moral, aren't I? The front door creaked open and Mrs. appeared out. My love, she said, I know that time passes differently for you, but unfortunately some of us are still wedded to it. The aardvark has grown quite cold and I am going to be bed. Mr. C, dear, don't worry, I'm not mad at you. And the door closed on silence, stretching out towards a starless sky and smoke-ringed clouds. Mountains, rivers, oceans, dissipating where Mr. A had blown them until they hung ghosted in distance like someone else's dream. Mr. C patted him on the knee. Why, I thank you, Mr. A, he said. That was quite an illuminating conversation. I'll have to think on it a while. Mind you do, said Mr. A. Now, if you'll excuse me. Yes, yes, said Mr. C. Good night, my dear man. Good night. Mr. A watched until the other man disappeared. He went inside and picked at the cold roast aardvark, drank a glass of that fine cognac. He looked in on his wife, who was asleep, and thought about when he had first made her. Blown her out of so much smoke. These gently curving wisps, sensual before the word, that had set his blood to boiling. And now. He went back onto the porch and packed his pipe again. Thought a while about godhood and delusion, a whole host of other things. Then he went to sleep, right there on porch, with his pipe perched unlit between his lips. And perhaps the world trundled on. Wow. That was a truly epic story of humanity's battle against a Lovecraftian horror. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our thrilling stories, and don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts on comments. Remember, when it comes to Reddit stories, you never know what you're going to get. So be a part of the action and join our community. We'll see you in the next episode. Don't forget, when it comes to Reddit stories, it's always better here on ReddFic.